Get into our first game of this series between Heriberto and Javier.
Alright, I can't wait to see the leads.
Yeah, like that's what I'm super excited about, because you mentioned maybe leaving that weather in the back, and you can kind of see Kingdra and Excadrill hitting the field, which would benefit from the weather from both of those partners.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of don't want to set the weather immediately because your opponent can always just take advantage and switch in their weather user. So Amoonguss right now provides a lot of disruption, especially if it's carrying the Koba Berry, which is very often used on it, because it means even if the Kingdra Dynamaxes and goes for a max Airstream onto Amoonguss should be able to get a Spore off in this turn. So Excadrill is actually opting to Dynamax here, and you could, go for a Steel Spike into Clefairy. Javier might predict that, go into the Politoed, and so by going for the Max Quake, you at least get a special defense boost. If Excadrill has that Focus Sash, then it'll be able to even survive any water type attack from the Kingdra. But I think the lead favors Heriberto a bit just because the Amoonguss puts on a lot of pressure with a early Spore.
Well, here's that weather coming into play as that drizzle becomes an active part of the battlefield. And now this Kingdra should be able to fire off some really effective water-type attacks at this Excadrill. But Excadrill going to Dynamax first, as we got a chance to see Heriberto select during that preview. And now the kind of question is whether or not Javier called it correctly.
Alright, let's see. Kingdra is not maxing here. Did it go for a Muddy Water? Oh, it's just a Protect. A Muddy Water there would have been absolutely huge, especially with the rain being up.
Yeah, that would have been huge, but here comes a Rage Powder just to try to draw away some of that attention from this Excadrill. So no Muddy Water coming through. This is a really free turn for Heriberto to get off big damage, and Politoed, that would have been the Clefairy taking that one.
Yeah, so Heriberto gets so much out of this turn. You don't end up going for a Steel Spike, end up going for a Max Quake instead, and Politoed is now in KO range from another one. You also get that special defense boost, and you force the Politoed to switch out, so Amoonguss potentially has the option to, say, switch into Tyranitar right now. You might be a little bit wary of, a really strong Muddy Water coming off, but, if Excadrill has that Focus Sash and you can knock out that Politoed, then you'll have weather control for the remainder of the game. And I think mainly what's really big right now for Amoonguss is, once again, the potential to just go for something like a Spore. I think going for a Max Quake on a Politoed and just sporing into Kingdra feels like a super, super safe play right now. And once again, that's why I have to ask, how does Javier actually deal with the sleeps?
Yeah, the sleeps are going to be a bit of a problem, but Kingdra is so fast, gets a chance to move first, but Excadrill hangs on. So that even though that was a huge critical hit and a huge amount of damage coming through, Excadrill still gets a chance to fire off another attack. So Heriberto using that Max Quake, going to be able to do the last bit of damage to knock out this Politoed. And just for those of you that are watching, players do submit their own matches, and this one happens to be just a little choppy, but it's a match we really wanted to show you this week.
Alright, let's see. There was the accuracy drop on Amoonguss, but it is able to connect on the Spore, and that's absolutely huge. So Kingdra is able to get a really powerful attack off with that Muddy Water boosted by the Helping Hand, but Excadrill, after getting that initial special defense boost, able to survive, doesn't bring it down to a potential Focus Sash. So, early pressure coming out from Heriberto, but Javier hasn't Dynamaxed or Gigantamaxed yet, so that could be what he's going for, right? Conserve the Dynamax and save it for the late game. Now, with Kingdra guaranteed to stay asleep for this subsequent turn, Excadrill's, going to be able to get another attack off before its max ends. Of course, Amoonguss here could put on pressure against Urshifu with a Spore, but if you're expecting just Urshifu to go for an attack to knock out the Amoonguss, especially if it's a Dark-type attack, then you can go for the Tyranitar switch in, which Heriberto is going for. That not only allows you to change the weather, also allows you to get some damage off with the Excadrill, and conserve the Amoonguss, of course, with Regenerator as well, allow the Amoonguss to heal back a little bit. So I think Javier at this point really has to go for the Gigantamax on the Urshifu, and you really have to get a lot out of these next 3 turns with the Gigantamax.
Yeah, but, well, here's where the weather control comes into play. Now that Politoed is out of the mix, this Tyranitar can come in and freely set up the sand. But you mentioned that Javier had held on to that Dynamax or Gigantamax factor, so it is going to come through now. And I expect that it is going to be the Urshifu that is going to be getting that factor. And, oh my goodness.
Alright, let's see whether it maybe predicted the Tyranitar switch and went for a Max Knuckle instead. Excadrill will get a Max Steel Spike off before anything, so notably giving defense boost to both of these Pokemon. which means maybe a Tyranitar can actually survive a Max Knuckle if it's going into that slot. Kingdra opts to stay in, so it will, take a turn of sleep here, which is important because you want it to wake up in this late game. But it's not a Max Knuckle. It's going to be the signature G-Max attack going into Tyranitar, so doesn't do very much damage there. Max Knuckle there not only would have been super effective, but also would have gotten the attack increase. However, hard to really, go for a Max Knuckle safely into an Amoonguss, because if the Amoonguss just stays in and goes for a Spore onto Urshifu, the game is essentially over. So playing it a little bit safe there. And now, Urshifu does have multiple turns of max left. The Excadrill isn't really putting on very much offensive pressure in terms of damage, and you pressure a lot with, both attacks, both fighting and dark type attacks from the Urshifu. So I think what's really critical here is, are you able to maybe predict when the Amoonguss or the Incineroar on Heriberto's end actually switches in? Because if you're able to capitalize off that and get a really powerful attack off, that would be huge. The main problem, for Javier is that if you go for a Knuckle and Amoonguss switches in, that resists, and then, Tyranitar resists those dark type attacks. So Incineroar here, though, will be able to get a Intimidate off quickly against the Urshifu, meaning that it, won't be doing as much damage.
Yeah, that can be really big, especially when Heriberto is in a position where they really want to be able to knock out this Urshifu. Javier actually goes ahead and brings Kingdra back in favor of this Clefairy, but here's the Max Knuckle, and it goes into the Incineroar. So Incineroar getting a lot of damage onto it, but the most important thing is that Intimidate is now no longer a factor. But, Urshifu takes so much damage.
Yeah, so a superpower coming out there, but the Clefairy switch in means that Urshifu takes less damage because of its ability. So I think from Javier's perspective there are two potential plays you can go for. You can try to just stay in with Kingdra because you're not in much immediate threat of damage and try to just, burn some more sleep turns. Or, because the threat of superpower is very real, switching to Clefairy means that the Urshifu will be able to survive. So now Incineroar's out. Incineroar doesn't really have any reason to go for a fake out into Clefairy because all of Clefairy's attacks pretty much have higher priority. So yeah, you'll want to basically switch out here and maybe conserve another Intimidate. On Urshifu's end, do you just go for another Max Knuckle into the Tyranitar slot, or do you predict the Amoonguss switch? And I think what's really scary right now is there's no really guaranteed safe play because of the threat of the Amoonguss switch in.
Amoonguss has been a bit of a problem for Javier, but whoa, would you look at that? He goes for a potential, goes for the G-Max again, the signature G-Max move, and that doesn't do quite enough damage to Tyranitar to be able to knock it out. So Tyranitar going to be able to get off yet another attack, as we do see Incineroar go for the U-turn, which does bring Amoonguss back out onto the field.
Yeah, critical once again. The not very effective attack goes into Tyranitar. Rock Slide comes out here, it doesn't do very much damage, but the main thing here is that Heriberto's kind of weathered the storm of Gigantamax Urshifu. Urshifu really wants to be able to get multiple knockouts and multiple turns, especially because you can take advantage of the fact that your opponent can't really protect through your attack. So Tyranitar in the end not eating up a single fighting type attack in the 3 turns that the Urshifu was out on the field. So right now what's really tricky is that the Kingdra is still asleep in the back. Amoonguss right now pretty much guaranteed to get a Spore off here, unless, you can maybe knock out the Amoonguss with something like a, Helping Hand, Wicked Blow into the Amoonguss, but Heriberto can just cycle back the Incineroar in, so swap Tyranitar out, get another Intimidate, and then go for a Spore on the Amoonguss. So this is still pretty close, especially if Kingdra is able to wake up, but the main thing that's in Heriberto's favor is that he does have the weather control, which means that the Excadrill will be able to outspeed everything in this late game. But I think it's really critical to maybe get one more Spore off here. If you're able to shut down the Clefairy, this game becomes a lot more difficult to win.
Well, here's that switch. Gets another Intimidate off. So Javier's Urshifu is going to be at -1 now. And Clefairy just going to go ahead and use that Follow Me. Try to redirect away the Spore. But here comes Urshifu. Just trying to secure a knockout, but Amoonguss hangs on. Even with a critical hit. So the Spore goes off, and that does connect with the Clefairy.
Yeah, so critical survival there. Of course, Urshifu's signature attack, allows it to actually always get those critical hits, so by going for that, the Intimidates actually really don't matter. So Clefairy potentially could have gone for, say, a Helping Hand there if it's carrying it, which is very, very common on it. If you pick up the knockout onto Amoonguss and the Clefairy doesn't fall asleep, and then you can go for further redirection later on, but Amoonguss critically able to survive there, able to get the Spore off, and now Urshifu no longer has that protection of redirection from Clefairy. Of course, Kingdra is still sleeping in the back as well, and I think what Heriberto is kind of setting himself up for is basically an Excadrill endgame where he's able to get a lot of damage off. So he just wants to position Excadrill to a point where it can come out and be safe against everything and just click Earthquake.
Yeah, that's one way to seal out the game, but you have to get into the position to be able to do that first. So unfortunately, the Spore to be able to shut down Urshifu is going to get negated by the Protect coming through from Javier's Urshifu, but the Sandstorm is over. Heriberto still has Tyranitar in the back, though.
Exactly, so that'll allow him to at least cycle it back in once again. So Urshifu here, able to get one big attack off before it faints. So Clefairy takes another turn of sleep here.
Oh, that's huge. Heriberto's been able to get multiple turns of sleep off, not only on Kingdra, but also this Clefairy. And Amoonguss goes down a bit of a champion for this match, just being able to land those spores and also that critical survival. But Flare Blitz from this Incineroar is going to be enough to knock out Javier's Urshifu, and now it's up to these two sleeping Pokemon to wake back up.
Yeah, so what's, tricky here is that the Kingdra has taken a turn of sleep. You're switching in Tyranitar here, so if the Kingdra is actually able to wake up this turn and just get a Muddy Water off, I mean, that Muddy Water knocks out everything on Heriberto's end at this point, right? So if Kingdra is able to wake up this turn, that would be absolutely huge. Of course, right now, you could go for just an attack with Tyranitar. I think protecting and maybe opting for a U-turn also could work. But I think right now, Heriberto is basically hoping that the Kingdra does not wake up this turn. If Kingdra wakes up, it will get a Muddy Water off. Let's see, Clefairy is the first to wake up. It gets the Follow Me, but is Kingdra going to be able to wake up? Oh, it's not!
No, it's not! Oh, that's actually huge! That means that Incineroar can go ahead and just, do some chip damage to Clefairy with the U-turn, but most importantly, Tyranitar is going to get off a huge Rock Slide as long as those rocks don't miss.
Yeah, exactly, and also, importantly, you get the Excadrill switch in for free, so now Excadrill in a position to just click Earthquake, Rock Slide, here it is, it's coming out! Is it able to connect both? It is! And that's just so much damage, even with the Friend Guard. I mean, you add the Sand damage, and now Excadrill can just safely go for an Earthquake, and Kingdra with the Life Orb, with Sand ticking down as well, you might be able to survive the attack from Excadrill here, but, even if you are, do you have enough turns to actually pick up knockouts? Because Protect Earthquake here is just such a safe play from Excadrill. So another critical turn of sleep once again there on the Kingdra. And Amoonguss was just so big for Heriberto in this set.
Absolutely. Amoonguss did so much work. But we'll see if Kingdra is able to wake back up. I feel like that's kind of the big question. But actually, Excadrill is going to be able to move first because of its speed. So Earthquake coming out here does pick up the knockout on the Clefairy. And Kingdra holds on.
Oh. Yeah, hold on, but even if it wakes up, and it is able to wake up, so it's going to get that Muddy Water off, but I think with Sand and Life Orb damage, it actually just faints after this turn, and that's why you really want the Rain up. With Kingdra, you get that increased damage output, also don't take the residual from Sand, so Excadrill's going to faint, but with Incineroar being able to switch back in, and yeah, Life Orb is going to take care of Kingdra. That is going to be Heriberto taking this very first game in what was honestly a really, really intense matchup here.
It ended up looking super close as well, but I, again, feel like the Amoonguss from Heriberto just put out so much pressure in order to just shut down what Javier's game plan was for that game one. Spores coming out, as well as just getting some critical survivals. It really sealed the deal for that game one.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about the turn that the Urshifu wasn't able to knock out the Amoonguss, and I think, once again, the Clefairy went for Follow Me there, fearing Tyranitar staying in and just going for yet another superpower, or mainly superpower into the Urshifu slot. By going for Follow Me, you make sure that the Urshifu at least survives, but if you knock out Amoonguss there, you keep around Clefairy for a little bit longer, which, provides value through further Follow Me's, and, the most important thing is just Kingdra, right? Kingdra wasn't able to do very much outside of that early game, and the very first turn of the game, Kingdra could have maybe opted for a Muddy Water, but it opted for a Protect instead and didn't even get targeted that turn, so wasn't able to get any damage off. Muddy Water there most likely would have brought an Excadrill down to its presumed Focus Sash, and then, the Excadrill was in immediate danger of just one more knockout, and you can't really get the one-hit KO onto the opposing Kingdra. So I think what's really important for Javier here is how do you actually play around the Amoonguss, because by not bringing the Venusaur or the Magnezone, there's really no way to stop the Spores from coming, right? Kingdra, of course, maybe it has that max Airstream into the Amoonguss, but Amoonguss, as you guys may have have seen, has that Koba Berry, so it's able to actually survive these really powerful max airstreams, even with helping hand support. And that's just a testament to Kingdra's, base special attack, not very high. So I think Venusaur would be an excellent adjustment this time around, because not only do you put on pressure in terms of damage, you also don't get spored, and you ignore the redirection from Amoonguss, so you can safely target the Tyranitar and the Excadrill with your grass-type attacks.
Well, let's see whether or not Venusaur is the adjustment that Javier makes as we get into this game 2 of this incredible set for losers round 10. Heriberto and Javier are going to be showing us what Pokemon they've brought, and lo and behold, there is the Venusaur next to Clefairy for Javier, but Heriberto brings Amoonguss and Excadrill.
Yeah, so Venusaur comes out exactly the adjustment I think we were hoping to see from Heriberto, or from Javier's end. So, what's also tricky about playing against Venusaur is always the turn 1 call, right? If you're worried about a Sleep Powder, that could be super scary because, Excadrill here might feel like, oh, I could just Dynamax, go for an attack, but if you do so and the Venusaur goes for a Sleep Powder and it connects, that is super, super rough. So I think Venusaur in the first turn of the game often just puts on so much pressure because you have to play the guessing game. Does it go for the Sleep Powder immediately, or does it just go for the Gigantamax? Looks like Heriberto's going to opt to play a little bit safe here, but now what he's at risk of is a potential, Venusaur Gigantamax just going for the Vine Lash into Excadrill, because that'll still do some damage, and then you have the residual damage as well, meaning that it's a lot harder for Excadrill to actually Dynamax by protecting on the first turn. Clefairy here, it could go for a Helping Hand, but I think Protect is actually a really safe option here because you want to avoid taking any potential damage from Excadrill. Also means that the Amoonguss cannot Spore you, making Amoonguss pretty much useless on this first turn.
Oh, I love that it's Gigantamax Venusaur as well. That's so exciting to see, as Excadrill does go for the Protect, but as you mentioned, this could be really tricky to play around because Javier can just kind of go for a lot of offensive pressure with some of those max moves. So here it comes. Excadrill takes so much damage through the Protect.
That's a lot of damage, and, you compound the residual effect as well. It's going to be a lot tougher. There's the Spore into the Clefairy as well, so I think Javier definitely getting the better end of the trade-off there. Heriberto probably hoping for, scouting out for a Sleep Powder there, ends up, taking 40% of damage even through Protect, and once again, that's why these residual effects from Pokemon like Gmax, Venusaur, or Charizard can just be so strong. That's multiple turns of this residual effect, right? So Amoonguss now can just pretty safely go for a Spore onto the Clefairy slot. What's just really tough is what do you actually do with Excadrill? If you go for the Dynamax right now, you just take so much more damage from the Vine Lash and the residual effect. So I don't think Heriberto wants to Dynamax Excadrill here. You could consider just going for an Iron Head. Maybe you switch out into, say, Incineroar if you're worried about another Vine Lash going into that slot. From Javier's end, if you want to predict a potential switch out, if you don't expect the Excadrill to Dynamax, you could go for something like Max Quake. You're even boosted by a Helping Hand because Clefairy's going to fall asleep here. And there's the Helping Hand to start things off.
Helping Hand just to be able to get a bit more damage, but it's going to be the Iron Head into Clefairy just to get it super low. But here is a Max Quake, goes right into the Excadrill, and that is enough to be able to finish it off. And I feel like the important thing as well is just like we're seeing a lot of these defense boosts come through for Javier's side, and that's going to be super helpful depending on what Heriberto has in the back.
So the Spore comes out once again, and Clefairy now will be asleep, guaranteed for the subsequent turn as well. But Heriberto has at least weathered the storm a little bit in terms of Dynamax. I think what makes this tricky is you can see that Tyranitar's his last Pokemon. You're not going to Dynamax the Amoonguss, and I think Incineroar Dynamaxing in a rain matchup doesn't feel very great as well, so you're pretty much relegated to Dynamaxing that Tyranitar in the late game. So the Incineroar switch out here makes sense. You don't want the Tyranitar to take any damage. Of course, there's the threat of residual damage from the Gmax Vine Lash. So by bringing in Incineroar, you at least put on some pressure. Can maybe even opt for something like just a Flare Blitz right now into the Venusaur. Amoonguss is really useless right now, other than maybe going for a Giga Drain onto Clefairy. Of course, because Venusaur is able to bypass the Rage Powder by being a Grass type here. So yeah, I don't think Rage Powder actually accomplishes very much here. I think Giga Drain into Clefairy or switching out into Tyranitar are both maybe better options. And the Incineroar here can obviously just go for either a Snarl or a Flare Blitz. I really think you want damage onto that Venusaur, so I think Flare Blitz is still able to chunk a fair amount away, although results in Incineroar taking a lot of recoil damage as well. From Venusaur's end, though, it's another guaranteed max move off, and a Max Quake into Incineroar will be some super effective damage, and won't care about this Rage Powder, which I don't think was really a great option on this turn, because Clefairy's never going to be attacking into Amoonguss.
Yeah, this is going to be so much damage. Incineroar does not take that super well because of all of that extra damage and the critical hit on top of it. Ooh.
Yeah, it's a big critical hit there. You can see how bulky Assault Vest Incineroar is, though, right? Able to survive that even after the critical hit. So very, very trained in special defense. Gets the Snarl off, but, you know, because it's Assault Vest, it doesn't have a berry to heal back up. After that critical hit, like, Venusaur, you know, might just be able to pick up a knockout onto that slot with an Earth Power now. And I think the Amoonguss just does nothing right now. That Rage Powder last turn pretty much accomplished nothing, which is why I would have liked to see either a Giga Drain into Clefairy or a Switch Out. Once again, Venusaur able to bypass those Rage Powders because of it being a Grass type, so doesn't really care about Amoonguss right now. And that's why Venusaur, you know, was the adjustment that we wanted to see. So, you know, Flare Blitz into Venusaur now, but if Clefairy wakes up, does stay asleep, and let's see if this is able to actually knock out the Incineroar. Oh, it hangs on!
Ooh, no, it does hang on, but the Flare Blitz, after doing so much damage, there is the recoil that comes through, and Venusaur hangs on too!
Oh, this Venusaur able to take in, that is why Clefairy is, you know, such a great support Pokemon. The Spore goes into the Venusaur slot, so maybe predicting a potential switch out there, you cover for the option of Venusaur switching out. Flare Blitz Spore, I think, is a relatively safe play, so it is now 4-2 in Javier's favor, but of course Heriberto does not have or Heriberto still has his Dynamax, right? So now Tyranitar can Dynamax go for a bunch of Max Rock Falls. I think what's tricky here, though, is the potential Politoed Kingdra still in the back. What's going to be really important for Javier is basically to maintain weather control. One play that you could make here, for example, is switch Clefairy out into Politoed so that Venusaur doesn't faint from sand, and then go for a Sleep Powder onto Tyranitar. If the Sleep Powder connects, then, you know, it will be able to basically shut down the main Pokemon that wants the Dynamax. Of course, Amoonguss could get around that by going for the Giga Drain onto the Venusaur slot, but as you saw, it's not the case for this turn.
Here's that Politoed, going to be able to reset the weather on the field, and now Javier is in firm control of the weather battle. Tyranitar does go for the Protect, though, so even though we are going to see Venusaur target down that slot, with that Protect, it will keep Tyranitar safe for now. As Giga Drain comes through from Politoed, revealing that it does have one of those super effective berries, and Politoed able to stay in this game for a little bit longer.
Yeah, what's really critical here is that Venusaur sticks on the field for another turn as well, because now you know Tyranitar protected. If Sleep Powder connects on this next turn on Tyranitar, that will be an absolute disaster for Heriberto. So what's tricky here is, yeah, I mean, you want a Dynamax, right, to start doing damage. And I think at this point, maybe you try to bank off a Venusaur Sleep Powder miss and just KO the Politoed, because then you'll have weather control as well. And then it will be Tyranitar Amoonguss versus Clefairy, which is still asleep, and presumably Kingdra on the back. So I think what's really critical here is Venusaur able to connect onto the Tyranitar? Here we go. Oh, it's actually just going to be a Helping Hand instead, so not opting for the Sleep Powder. Tyranitar didn't Dynamax here, so once again, the Rage Powder is not protecting the Tyranitar from the Venusaur. If it's a Leaf Storm, that just might be a knockout. And there's a Leaf Storm!
Yeah.
Is it enough for KO?
It does. Oh no, Heriberto not able to use the Dynamax for Tyranitar in this game. And now who is your offensive threat? Amoonguss won't be able to get the job done versus the 4 Pokemon that Javier still has. And I will, yeah, what a game. Javier's adjustment for the Venusaur came in clutch.
Yeah, that endgame was really intense. I mean, I think, like, if Tyranitar Dynamax is there and you knock out the Politoed and you pick up a double KO that turn, then, you know, there's maybe still a shot, because Helping Hand Leaf Storm I don't think will KO there. It'll do a lot of damage, and then it's contingent off basically if Kingdra's in the back hitting those Muddy Waters in the late game. Of course, if the Clefairy also stays asleep for further, Amoonguss can maybe go for Spores onto the Kingdra. So, in the end, Heriberto made the decision to not Dynamax there, and ends up, you know, just not even having a chance after the Helping Hand Leaf Storm. So, you know, we saw Javier go for the Helping Hand Leaf Storm, just trying to opt for as much damage as possible. I think the idea behind that is, okay, even if you end up Dynamaxing, I'm able to do so much damage that a Muddy Water from Kingdra in the end game maybe can just seal it up. So, I think Tyranitar Dynamaxing there would have been a lot closer, but I think at that point maybe hoping for a miss or baiting a Sleep Powder potentially out there. I would have liked to see Tyranitar Dynamax, I think, because by going down there, you just stand no shot at winning, and this is why Dynamax is so critical, and choosing when to Dynamax in this format is also very, very important. So I think the Venusaur adjustment is very, very good, and I think from Javier's end, you should probably stick with the Venusaur as the Pokemon to really go for the Gigantamax, because Kingdra in the late game can, be a really, really good sweeper. As we saw in the last game, Kingdra didn't even go for the max, or in that first game, but it also just fell asleep so quickly. So I guess the question is from Heriberto's end, what adjustments do you have to make? And the idea, I think, this time is to stall out the Gigantamax from Venusaur, and you can do a bunch of things for that. I think, if you lead Excadrill, once again, you have to maybe go for some max Quakes, but leading Excadrill is risky because, once again, if the Venusaur just sleep powders you, then that can be really tough. So instead, you can maybe play a little bit more passively, go with something like Incineroar or Togekiss just to maybe stall out the first couple of turns. We saw how bulky this Assault Vest Incineroar is, even from a, critical hit max Quake able to survive with around 1/3 of its health. So Incineroar might be the answer to kind of, once again, weather the storm, or some critical switch outs, right? If you're able to predict the Venusaur going for a Vine Lash and you switch in the Incineroar, that's already one turn that you burn down. If you expect a max Quake, you could maybe switch in a Moongus into that slot if you don't need it. So it's all about playing defensively, I think, against the Venusaur in the first couple of turns. Heriberto was able to stall out the Gigantamax relatively successfully in that last game, but just kind of fell behind too much and then didn't go for that Dynamax on Tyranitar. So in this third game, I think, don't need the Excadrill, or if you do, go for max Quakes immediately if you're predicting the Venusaur to just max and not sleep powder you.
Well, let's find out as we get into the game 3, the conclusion in this series between Heriberto and Javier. And we mentioned that Venusaur was the linchpin of Javier's success in that second game. And take a look at Heriberto's adjustment, bringing Incineroar and bringing a Moongus to start it off.
Yeah, so once again, the Venusaur puts on sleep powder pressure. Now you've got Incineroar, which is a really bulky Pokemon that can take these attacks well. I think you see Heriberto going for the Spore into Clefairy, pretty much no other attack to really even try to go for, I think, so it makes a lot of sense here. And I think on the Incineroar's end, you can go for a Fake Out onto Venusaur if you're worried about his Sleep Powder, but you can also just opt for a Snarl to decrease the special attack. I think the Snarl actually makes a lot of sense because, if Sleep Powder misses, for example, or Venusaur maxes, then shutting down Venusaur with Snarl is great. Venusaur opts not to max, so it's going to be the Sleep Powder, and it's going to connect on the Incineroar.
That is a bit of a pickle for Heriberto to be in, because you obviously want to be able to get work done with the Incineroar, but a Spore fires out into the protected Clefairy. So this seems like a better turn for Javier if you just look at it from just the start of the game.
Yeah, I think what's tricky, though, for Javier's end is, you can, max the Venusaur immediately, because the Incineroar has Snarl. As soon as the Venusaur maxes, if Incineroar is able to get a quick wake up and gets a single Snarl off, that's so critical in making it do so much less damage, right? So Venusaur is going to commit the max this turn, and Spore into Clefairy is pretty much a guaranteed play once again, because we saw the Protect last turn. So I think Clefairy once again probably just wants to opt for something like a Helping Hand. You could go for a Helping Hand max Quake into the Incineroar, or a max Ooze if you want to increase that special attack before the Snarl comes out.
Yeah, there's the Helping Hand coming through just to give Venusaur a little bit of extra help, as it is the max Ooze to boost that special attack. This is a great turn for Heriberto, just being able to deny one of these turns of Gigantamax coming through from Venusaur, not securing a knockout.
Yeah, Incineroar critically stays asleep for another turn, so not able to get any attacks off. Snarl there could be a really big deal, because if you wake up there and you're able to basically force Venusaur to spend 3 turns to knock out Incineroar, then you essentially traded an Incineroar for a Gigantamax Venusaur, which I think is, a really, really good trade-off here. So, unable to wake up. Now, my big question is whether a Max Quake can actually knock out, because I believe that last critical hit Max Quake did 134 damage, and now you have the special attack boost, so it's essentially the same damage output from a crit. So, let's see, Max Quake coming out into Incineroar. Is it able to pick up the knockout?
Oh,
it is!
Wow,
it is able to pick up the knockout, and it's another crit onto the Incineroar!
What?
Oh! Yeah, there's a chance Incineroar... Yeah, there's a chance the Incineroar could have hung on from there based on the damage output from that previous critical hit. So, goes down immediately, doesn't even have the chance of waking up, and you've also got that special attack boost on Venusaur now. So what makes this so tricky is just having that last turn of Gigantamax from the Venusaur. You know, Venusaur often wants to go for that Vine Lash on the last turn, so if Incineroar hangs on there, I think most likely Javier would spend that last turn of Gigantamax Vine Lashing the Incineroar to pick up a knockout, and then you get a free switch and into Tyranitar or Excadrill. What makes this really tricky now is that the Clefairy can just switch out into Politoed, change the weather, and then you can just go for a Vine Lash onto Tyranitar this turn. If you expect Tyranitar to protect, then, and you're worried about, you know, activating Weakness Policy, you could of course go for a Vine Lash onto Venusaur, get that residual effect off. Maybe don't switch out Clefairy this turn. You could consider switching out here if you're confident in knocking out Tyranitar, but Tyranitar is a really bulky Pokemon, so I think you have to respect the threat of it Dynamaxing and going for a Rockfall. So looks like Javier is going to offer the latter, is not going to go for the switch out into Politoed. And Tyranitar protects. Let's see who Venusaur targets.
Very interesting predicament to be in. Well, here comes the G-Max Vine Lash, and it is going to be Amoonguss that actually takes this one, so not the Tyranitar. Calling that protect correctly as the Spore comes through, just in case Clefairy did wake up, but it's still asleep.
Yeah, so, you know, covering the option of Clefairy switching out and, you know, Javier actually staying in and not going for or not waking up there actually ends up benefiting him because now, you know, Clefairy will be able to wake up relatively safely. So what's really tricky now for Heriberto is that Javier can just switch the Clefairy into Politoed and go for a Leaf Storm onto Tyranitar. You've got that increased stage of special attack from that Max Ooze as well. That honestly might just be enough to knock out Tyranitar, and even if not, I'm thinking after the residual damage from G-Max Vine Lash, it's enough. So if you're able to knock out Tyranitar, especially because Tyranitar looks like it is going to commit the max here, then you'll have weather control in the late game, and if Kingdra's in the back, Kingdra fares pretty well against Amoonguss and Excadrill, so there's the switch into Politoed. I mean, if Leaf Storm just hits the Tyranitar here, might just be enough for a knockout. Let's see.
Ooh, well, Tyranitar will actually go ahead and Dynamax this game, and I think this is a really great play from Heriberto, just because if you are able to get a knockout, especially onto that Politoed, I think that ends up putting Heriberto in a really, really good position, but let's find out exactly what's going to happen.
Oh, there's the Leaf Storm!
The Leaf Storm,
it misses! It misses!
That's huge!
Oh my goodness, that is such a critical miss, because even if you don't knock out the Tyranitar, you do so much damage that I think after 2 Vine Lash residual effects, you pick up the knockout. So now not only do you get no damage onto Tyranitar, you also knock out the Venusaur completely, and you get weather back in your favor, and the Spore onto Politoed. That's a disastrous miss from Javier's end, and oh man, such a critical miss there. I think Heriberto, you know, because of that critical hit on Slee Incineroar early, fell into a pretty big hole because the Venusaur was able to, you know, go for just a really powerful Vine Lash and, you know, get the residual damage started. That Max Ooze earlier onto the Venusaur also really critical, but yeah, miss there means Tyranitar's able to hang on. Now, how do you actually do enough damage on Javier's end, right? You've got a sleeping Politoed. Clefairy is going to wake up soon, but that doesn't do anything. So it's all about Kingdra, but Kingdra has to weather the storm of Amoonguss and Tyranitar. So sure, you can bring Kingdra out, but a Muddy Water is just going to activate the weakness policy on that Tyranitar. So you maybe have to like bring the Kingdra out, switch the Politoed back out into Clefairy, and then, you know, switch back in. It's actually Clefairy coming out here, which means that Javier's end of this, you know, his end is just so passive right now. So I think if you have that Kingdra in the back, I would have liked to see Kingdra out instead, because then you can pivot Politoed into Clefairy and then switch back out and then go for a Muddy Water, and maybe that's enough to knock out Tyranitar with Rain being up. So, you know, that was just such a critical miss there. Tyranitar able to pick up a knockout on, you know, the biggest threat, also able to change the weather, and you get the free Spore into Politoed. Pretty much a disaster.
Yeah, this is huge. Oh my goodness. What a turn of effect for both of these players, where Javier kind of looked like they were in the driver's seat because of how much work that Venusaur was getting done. But then that miss of the Leaf Storm, and Heriberto is just in a much better position now, as we're going to see the switch out here into Kingdra as the last bit of offensive pressure that Javier has on this team. And even with the follow me, we'll see whether or not this switch in actually ends up being free. As here comes Max Rockfall. Clefairy does hang on though, but not after this Giga Drain comes through.
Yeah, able to hang on there, and like you mentioned, the Giga Drain actually finishes it off. So Heriberto actually going for the Giga Drain instead of Spore. Spore would have made things actually a little bit more awkward because you put Clefairy to sleep, but then, you know, you can switch out the Clefairy into Politoed the subsequent turn. So I think Javier's game plan there was basically to get a guaranteed free switch in into the Kingdra that was relatively safe, which is why he opted to switch the Clefairy in. Knew that Clefairy was going to, you know, be able to wake up. So Now at least you have Reina, but it's Kingdra. Like, if Tyranitar didn't have Dynamax, this would be a different story. But the reality is that Tyranitar still has one more turn of Max. And, can you actually knock out the Amoonguss? Also, can Muddy Water actually knock out the Tyranitar here? Tyranitar is just such a bulky Pokemon. Even with Rain and Life Orb, I'm thinking I can actually survive a Muddy Water here and just get a, Rock Fall off. If you're worried about the Muddy Water knocking you out on Heriberto's end, you can go for a Max Guard and just Spore the Kingdra. But, of course, one thing you have to respect is the potential Muddy Water getting an accuracy drop onto Amoonguss or a Hurricane, landing a Confusion onto the Amoonguss if you predict the Tyranitar to Max Guard. So, the big question here is, if the Muddy Water comes out, is it able to actually pick up the knockout against Tyranitar? If not, that pretty much will be the game. But looks like Kingdra's actually going to opt for a Max here to stall out, Tyranitar's Dynamax. But what makes this tricky is that the Tyranitar going for the Rockfall can just reset the weather. Now you don't have that increased damage output, and Tyranitar gets the Sand up.
Politoed's going to be asleep as well, so that is going to be a bit of a problem for Javier, as the Max Rockfall does go for Kingdra, who did protect, and even though you're getting a little bit of damage up, the most important thing is that the Sandstorm is back on the field.
Yeah, exactly. Sandstorm basically setting it up for the Excadrill endgame now. That's why it was so critical to knock out Tyranitar, especially once Max, because Max Tyranitar able to control the weather a lot more through Max Rockfalls in every turn, making it a lot harder for you to actually consistently get rain up on Javier's end. So now, we know Kingdra took its Protect, so I think now Politoed, if it's able to wake up, you probably want to go for something like a Helping Hand and a Muddy Water, but what's just really tricky is now Javier does not have weather control unless the Politoed actually has Rain Dance. So let's see, no Helping Hand from the Politoed, so it's just going to be Muddy Water, and it's not able to knock out Tyranitar.
No, that's huge for Heriberto. You do get that little bit of an accuracy drop there, but the weakness policy comes through, and that's going to do so much damage to the Pokemon that Javier has left.
Oh,
well, here
Rock Slide comes out, Politoed stays asleep. There's one miss, there's two misses!
There's two misses! The accuracy drop actually mattered there!
I still think it's just so hard to claw out of this one because now Amoonguss gets the Spore off against the Kingdra, right? So Kingdra's really your main means of offense. If Politoed has, a spread water type attack like its own Surf, you can maybe knock out the Tyranitar. Otherwise, what's really tricky now is, once again, there's still the Excadrill waiting in the back. You've got the weakness policy activated on Tyranitar. Kingdra guaranteed takes a turn of sleep here, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So even if Politoed wakes up, this Rage Powder will redirect any single target attacks, whether it be like a Scald or, another attack off. And if the Rock Slide connects this time around, that should just be the game. Okay, Politoed wakes up. It's going to be Ice Beam.
Yeah, so Amoonguss is going to redirect that away, and still is able to hang on. But the Rock Slide connects to both Pokemon. Kingdra gets knocked out here.
And when Kingdra going down, I think that should basically seal up the game. Politoed didn't end up waking up last turn, but I think Javier could have maybe tried to go for the Helping Hand Muddy Water, at least pick up the knockout onto Tyranitar, and then you have Politoed Kingdra relatively healthy against Amoonguss and Excadrill, but this Amoonguss just put in so much work, right? The Venusaur was able to at least make, not be able to get spored, but there's no great damage output from the opposing side into Amoonguss, other than, once again, a potential Hurricane from Kingdra. But with the Koba Berry that we've seen on the Amoonguss, it's just so difficult to actually knock it out. So I think